The simulation that didn't follow doctrine. The Interstellar Tactical Academy did not accept anomalies. It existed to eliminate them. For nearly 3 centuries, the Academy's purpose had remained unchanged: produce officers capable of coordinating multi-species fleets under shared doctrine during coalition defense operations. Its graduates commanded patrol groups along unstable borders, escorted trade corridors through disputed sectors, and occasionally coordinated limited interventions between rival systems when diplomatic arbitration failed. The Academy did not teach wars of conquest. It taught stability. Which was why Cadet Armin Hale's simulation run became a problem almost immediately. Not because it failed. Because it worked. The exercise itself was routine. Scenario Block 7C, Distributed Escort Collapse. Every cadet knew it. A convoy of 12 civilian logistics vessels moving through a contested transit corridor. A 3-frigate escort screen assigned by the Coalition Defense Authority. Unknown hostile presence entering sensor range from 2 vectors with delayed reinforcement expected after 27 minutes. Standard doctrine dictated withdrawal. Preserve the escorts. Preserve command continuity. Sacrifice the convoy if necessary. Coalition doctrine had been shaped by centuries of experience. Civilian logistics vessels were replaceable. Command crews were not. The purpose of Scenario 7C was not victory. It was judgment. Cadets were evaluated on how efficiently they disengaged. The observation chamber above Simulation Theater 3 remained mostly quiet as the scenario initialized. Instructor Veltrin adjusted his secondary display lens and leaned slightly forward. Human cadet beginning deployment, he noted. Instructor Serat, positioned beside him, rotated one ocular ridge in acknowledgement. Expected response. Veltrin answered without hesitation. Standard escort withdrawal. The human had scored within acceptable performance parameters throughout previous exercises. Slightly unconventional sensor prioritization. Above-average logistics modeling. Marginally delayed compliance with coalition disengagement timing thresholds. Nothing unusual. Nothing concerning. Nothing memorable. Until now. Cadet Hale did not order withdrawal. Instead, he repositioned the escorts closer to the convoy's projected trajectory path. Serat noticed first. He is compressing the defensive screen. Veltrin confirmed the telemetry. That increases exposure risk. Yes. Neither instructor spoke for several seconds. Inside the simulation chamber, Hale's fleet icons continued moving. Not backward. Forward. The hostile contacts appeared on schedule. 2 interceptor-class signatures. Fast. Minimal shielding. Long-range strike capability optimized for convoy disruption. Standard doctrine predicted immediate escort withdrawal once threat vectors stabilized. Instead, Hale altered formation geometry again. The escort frigates separated. One accelerated ahead of the convoy. One shifted laterally beyond sensor shadow overlap. The third remained centered. Serat adjusted magnification. He is breaking escort cohesion. Veltrin responded automatically. That violates coordination protocol. Yet the formation held. Not randomly. Precisely. The interceptors executed their expected attack profile. Vector split. Cross-angle strike alignment. Convoy targeting priority confirmed. Coalition doctrine predicted escort withdrawal window, 17 seconds. Hale did not withdraw. Instead, he delayed convoy engine synchronization by 6 seconds. Veltrin paused his recording log. Why? Serat replied quietly. He is modifying intercept geometry. The leading escort frigate accelerated. Not toward the interceptors. Toward empty space between projected engagement arcs. Its sensor signature expanded deliberately. Radiation bloom. Thermal masking disruption. The interceptor targeting solutions shifted instantly. Serat leaned forward. He forced retargeting. Veltrin said nothing. The second escort frigate executed a lateral burn. Its movement appeared inefficient at first glance. Fuel expensive. Doctrinally discouraged. But when the interceptors corrected their targeting path, the convoy's projected exposure window narrowed. Not by much. 3 seconds. Then 6. Then 9. Serat recalculated silently. Convoy survival probability increasing. Veltrin replied. Still below acceptable threshold. Yes. But rising. The third escort frigate did not move. It powered down active emissions. Temporarily vanished from hostile sensor lock. Veltrin stared at the telemetry. He is reducing detectable mass. Serat responded. No. He is repositioning threat priority. The interceptors fired. Not at the convoy. At the forward escort frigate. Exactly where Hale wanted them to fire. Inside the observation chamber, Instructor Veltrin stopped recording entirely. Because something unusual had just happened. The convoy survived the first strike window. No cadet had achieved that outcome in the last 82 simulation cycles. Not even top-ranked tactical specialists. Because Doctrine did not attempt to preserve the convoy. Doctrine preserved command assets. Hale preserved both. Serat spoke first. He is trading escort survivability margins. Veltrin replied. Yes. But within acceptable thresholds. That is not possible. No. It is not. Reinforcement countdown continued. 19 minutes remaining. Far too long for convoy survival under normal engagement assumptions. Yet the convoy remained intact. Hale adjusted formation again. Not aggressively. Carefully. Each movement reshaped interceptor targeting predictions without provoking full commitment. He was not winning the engagement. He was delaying its outcome. Serat opened probability modeling overlays. Convoy survival chance, 11%. Then 14. Then 18. Veltrin's secondary display recalculated. That is statistically irrelevant. Serat answered. No. It is not irrelevant. Because coalition doctrine never aimed for probabilities below 30%. Those scenarios were categorized as non-recoverable. Which meant cadets were trained not to attempt recovery. Hale was attempting recovery anyway. The interceptors corrected their trajectory again. They accelerated toward the convoy's exposed flank. Hale responded instantly. The emission-silent escort frigate reactivated its sensors at precisely the wrong moment for hostile targeting logic. The interceptors shifted focus again. Serat exhaled slowly. He is manipulating threat confidence. Veltrin replied. Yes. He is. Reinforcement arrival countdown reached 11 minutes. Convoy survival probability, 27%. Then 31. Serat stopped speaking entirely. Because the scenario had just crossed into recoverable territory. Without violating escort preservation doctrine. Without abandoning convoy assets. Without losing command continuity. Without requesting simulation override. The classroom below the observation chamber remained silent. Cadets watched their displays without speaking. Because none of them had ever seen Scenario 7C behave this way before. Not once. Not in training archives. Not in tactical reviews. Not in doctrine briefings. Reinforcement arrival, 6 minutes. Intercept signatures weakening. Fuel margins tightening. Convoy still intact. Escort integrity still operational. Simulation control flagged anomaly status automatically. Instructor review required. Veltrin finally resumed recording. Cadet Hale, he said quietly. Yes, instructor? Where did you learn this formation behavior? There was a pause. Then Hale answered. Historical convoy escort doctrine. Serat blinked. That doctrine predates interstellar coalition formation. Yes. It does. Veltrin asked the next question carefully. Human doctrine. Yes, instructor. From your homeworld? Yes. Veltrin studied the simulation outcome metrics again. Convoy survival probability, 42%. Escort survivability, acceptable. Command integrity, preserved. Scenario outcome classification. Recovered. For the first time since the simulation began, neither instructor spoke. Because coalition doctrine did not contain a method for solving Scenario 7C that way. But apparently, humanity did the doctrine humanity never shared. The simulation did not end when the convoy survived. It ended when the Academy flagged the result as unclassified anomaly behavior requiring instructor review. That distinction mattered. At the Interstellar Tactical Academy, exercises were not simply training tools. They were controlled environments designed to reinforce centuries of coalition doctrine. Every scenario had acceptable solution pathways. Every acceptable solution had precedent. And every precedent had already been evaluated across multiple species command frameworks. Cadet Armin Hale's solution did not belong to any of them. Which meant the instructors were no longer observing a performance. They were observing a question. The classroom remained quiet after the simulation concluded. Coalition cadets did not react loudly during tactical review periods. Surprise, especially professional surprise, expressed itself differently across species. Some shifted posture. Others adjusted ocular lenses. One amphibious cadet flattened its dorsal membrane against its chair in what the Academy's cultural index identified as uncertainty. Only the human cadet remained still. Not confident. Not nervous. Simply waiting. Instructor Veltrin terminated the simulation projection and replaced it with a replay grid. "Cadet Hale," he said, voice neutral. "Yes, Instructor. Your formation compression maneuver contradicts Coalition escort spacing doctrine." "Yes. And yet you executed it deliberately." "Yes." Veltrin paused. "Explain." Hale did not answer immediately. He looked instead at the replay grid. At the convoy. At the interceptors. At the 3 escort frigates. Then he spoke. "Coalition escort doctrine assumes escorts must remain visible threats to hostile targeting logic." "That assumption is correct," Veltrin replied. "It is correct," Hale agreed. "But only if the attacker expects escorts to behave predictably." Serrat leaned forward slightly. "You assumed unpredictability would create hesitation." "No," Hale said. "I assumed predictability would create opportunity." That answer changed the atmosphere in the room. Coalition doctrine treated predictability as a stabilizing factor. Predictable fleets could coordinate. Predictable formations could synchronize. Predictable responses prevented escalation spirals. Predictability was safety. Hale was describing predictability as something else entirely. A liability. Veltrin activated a secondary telemetry overlay. "You altered emission signatures before the interceptors committed to attack." "Yes." "That maneuver risked convoy detection clarity." "Yes." "Why accept that risk?" Hale answered simply. "Because they were already committed." Serrat spoke. "You predicted their commitment window." "Yes." "How?" Hale hesitated. Then answered honestly. "Historical engagement timing patterns." Several cadets exchanged glances. Historical engagement timing patterns were not part of Scenario 7C briefing materials. They were not part of Coalition Doctrine modules either. Veltrin noticed immediately. "Clarify." Hale adjusted his posture slightly. "Before interstellar contact," he said carefully, human naval doctrine developed escort strategies for protecting non-combat shipping against fast attack craft. Serrat blinked. "Planetary naval doctrine?" "Yes." "Preorbital?" "Yes." The room became quieter. Not because planetary doctrine was irrelevant. Because it almost always was. Coalition fleets operated across distances that made planetary naval comparisons largely symbolic. Most species abandoned surface-based maritime combat concepts long before achieving interstellar capability. Except humanity. Apparently. Veltrin spoke again. "You applied pre-interstellar escort doctrine to an interstellar convoy simulation." "Yes." "Why?" Hale considered the answer before responding. "Because the threat behavior matched the pattern." Serrat tilted her head slightly. "You believed interceptor behavior resembled atmospheric strike craft doctrine." "Yes." "Why?" Hale answered. "Because they behaved like predators that expected escorts to retreat." That was not a technical answer. It was an observational one. And observational reasoning was rarely included in coalition doctrine analysis. Coalition doctrine depended on sensor certainty. Human doctrine, apparently, depended on expectation modeling. Veltrin expanded the replay grid again. The escort frigate that had moved forward appeared highlighted. "You forced targeting reassignment." "Yes." "That maneuver exposed the escort to strike priority." "Yes." Coalition doctrine would classify that as unacceptable command risk." "Yes." "Yet you executed it." "Yes." Veltrin paused. "Why?" Hale answered. "Because the convoy mattered." That answer produced a reaction. Not dramatic. Not visible to most cadets. But Serrat noticed it immediately. Because coalition doctrine did not treat convoy survival as a primary objective in Scenario 7C. Command survival came first. Fleet cohesion came second. Convoy survival came third. Hale had reversed that hierarchy. Serrat asked carefully. "You prioritized civilian assets above escort survivability margins." "Yes." "Why?" Hale's answer came without hesitation. "Because escorts exist to protect civilian movement." That sentence should have been obvious. It should have been universal. But within coalition doctrine, escorts existed to preserve command continuity first. Protection of civilian logistics was a secondary function, not the primary one. Veltrin deactivated the replay grid. Then reactivated it again from the beginning. Repeat the maneuver explanation, he said. Hale complied. He described timing windows, sensor confidence thresholds, emission masking, formation asymmetry, threat expectation loops. None of his explanations sounded dramatic. None of them sounded experimental. They sounded practiced, documented, routine. Surratt spoke again. This doctrine is not included in coalition tactical archives. No, Hale said. It isn't. Why? Hale hesitated. Then answered with unexpected directness. Because no one asked. That response caused several cadets to shift posture again. Not because it was disrespectful. Because it was plausible. Coalition tactical integration after first contact had focused primarily on propulsion compatibility, sensor translation frameworks, and fleet command hierarchy standardization. Planetary-era escort doctrine had never been considered strategically relevant. Until now. Veltrin activated the probability modeling overlay again. Convoy survival probability remained at 42%. Scenario classification still displayed. Recovered. That classification had only occurred 4 times in Academy simulation history. 3 of those involved reinforcement arrival errors in archived modeling datasets. Only 1 had been executed intentionally. By a different species. More than a century ago. Surratt spoke quietly. You did not invent this maneuver. No. You learned it. Yes. From where? Hale answered. Convoy protection studies from Earth's late orbital expansion period. Veltrin recorded the response. Then asked the question that changed the direction of the entire review. Cadet Hale, he said carefully. Why was this doctrine not included in humanities coalition integration briefings? Hale blinked once. Then answered honestly. Because it wasn't classified as fleet doctrine. Surratt frowned slightly. Then what was it classified as? Hale replied. Merchant protection. That answer stayed in the room longer than expected. Because merchant protection doctrine was rarely considered strategically important. Coalition fleets protected trade corridors constantly. But they did so using standardized escort geometry designed around deterrence visibility. Not deception timing. Not expectation modeling. Not threat psychology. Veltrin exchanged a brief glance with Surratt. Then returned his attention to Hale. Cadet, he said. Are there additional convoy protection strategies within human historical doctrine not currently present in coalition tactical libraries? Hale considered the question carefully. Then answered. Yes. No one in the classroom moved. Because that answer carried implications larger than the simulation itself. Coalition doctrine had assumed humanity entered interstellar space with minimal transferable fleet strategy. Mostly observational. Mostly adaptive. Mostly compatible. Not original. Not independent. Not different. Apparently. That assumption had been incomplete. Veltrin ended the session formally. Simulation Theater 3 review complete, he announced. Cadet Hale will remain for instructor consultation. The rest of the class departed quietly. No one spoke to the human cadet on the way out. Not out of avoidance. Out of attention. Because something subtle had shifted. Not in the simulation. In the Academy's understanding of humanity, the quiet review that became a doctrine inquiry. Cadet Armin Hale did not expect the review session to become formal. Normally, instructor consultations after simulation anomalies lasted less than 10 minutes. A clarification. A correction. Occasionally a recommendation to repeat the exercise under alternate parameters. Instead, Simulation Theater 3 remained sealed. Observation system stayed active. And 2 additional instructors entered the chamber. That did not happen by accident. Instructor Veltrin did not begin the conversation immediately. Instead, he opened a secure tactical archive window on the central projection wall. Cadet Hale, he said calmly, your previous explanation referenced pre-interstellar convoy protection doctrine. Yes, instructor. And you confirmed additional strategies exist within that doctrine. Yes. Veltrin nodded once. We would like to review them. The request itself was unusual. Coalition Academy instructors rarely asked cadets to teach doctrine. Training flowed in the opposite direction. But this was no longer a normal review session. Because the convoy survival solution Hale demonstrated had already triggered a procedural flag inside the Academy's doctrine consistency monitors. The monitors did not decide whether something was correct. They decided whether something was missing. The chamber door opened again. Instructor Thalek entered without announcement. He specialized in multi-species fleet synchronization analysis, which meant his presence confirmed something important. This review was no longer about one simulation. It was about compatibility. Thalek positioned himself opposite Hale. You stated your maneuver relied on threat expectation modeling. Yes. That concept is not included in coalition escort geometry doctrine. Yes. Explain why your historical doctrine assumes attacker expectation patterns remain stable. Hale considered the question carefully before answering. Because attackers plan around defender reactions. Thalek tilted his cranial ridge slightly. All attackers? No. Most. Why? Because uncertainty increases operational cost. That answer immediately drew Veltrin's attention. Coalition doctrine assumed attackers exploited uncertainty. Human doctrine, apparently, assumed attackers avoided it when possible. Those were not the same assumptions. They produced very different defensive structures. Thalek adjusted the projection. The convoy scenario replay returned. This time, he isolated only the interceptor trajectories. Your maneuver forced targeting reassignment twice. Yes. Coalition doctrine predicts interceptors would ignore that disruption. Yes. But they did not. No. Why? Hale answered. Because they committed early. Veltrin spoke again. Coalition interceptors commit early in 72% of recorded convoy strike scenarios. Yes. And you relied on that behavior. Yes. Without confirmation. Yes. Serat finally asked the question none of them had asked yet. Cadet Hale, did you expect your maneuver to succeed? Hale hesitated. Then answered honestly. No, that response changed the tone of the room again. Because confidence was expected in simulation execution. Uncertainty was not. Yet Hale's maneuver had succeeded anyway. Serat leaned forward slightly. Then why attempt it? Hale answered quietly. Because it improved the convoy's chances. There it was again. The same reasoning as before. Not optimal victory probability. Not doctrinal alignment. Improvement. Incremental advantage. Survival margin expansion. Human strategy, it seemed, was comfortable operating below certainty thresholds. Coalition doctrine preferred certainty before commitment. Thalek activated a secondary comparison overlay. 3 coalition escort formations appeared beside Hale's modified geometry. Standard defensive screen. Expanded perimeter coverage. Command preservation configuration. Each of them prioritized escort survival first. Each of them abandoned convoy survivability earlier than Hale's model. Thalek spoke carefully. Your formation redistributed escort risk asymmetrically. Yes. That violates coordination equilibrium. Yes. Yet you maintain fleet cohesion. Yes. How? Hale answered simply. Because cohesion is not symmetry. Veltrin stopped recording again. That sentence mattered. Coalition doctrine defined cohesion as geometric reliability. Human doctrine, apparently, defined cohesion differently. Functionally. Serat adjusted her display. Your forward escort frigate accepted primary strike probability. Yes. Coalition doctrine classifies that as command risk escalation. Yes. Why was that acceptable? Hale replied. Because escorts exist to shape attack behavior. Thalek looked at Veltrin. Veltrin looked back. Neither spoke for several seconds. Because shaping attack behavior was not a coalition escort objective. It was a coalition interceptor objective. Humans, apparently, expected escorts to influence attacker decisions directly. Veltrin resumed the inquiry. Cadet Hale, how many variations of this convoy protection strategy exist within your historical doctrine? Hale thought briefly. At least 6 primary formations. Serat blinked once. Primary formations. Yes. And secondary variations. Several. The projection wall remained silent. Because coalition escort doctrine contained exactly 3 standard convoy protection geometries. 3. Not 6. Not several. 3. Thalek adjusted his posture. Are these formations documented? Yes. In public military archives? Yes. Accessible through coalition integration networks? Yes. Serat spoke carefully. Then why were they never included in integration modeling? Hale answered with the same quiet honesty as before. They were categorized as legacy maritime transition doctrine. Veltrin understood immediately. Legacy doctrine. Planetary era doctrine. Pre-interstellar doctrine. Coalition analysts had filtered it out automatically. Not intentionally. Procedurally. Because most species abandoned planetary naval doctrine before achieving orbital warfare capability. Humanity had not. Thalek activated a probability projection grid. Cadet Hale, he said. If additional escorts were available in Scenario 7C, would your formation change? Yes. How? I would increase false target density. Veltrin paused. False target density? Yes. You mean decoy emissions? No. Then what? Escorts behaving like decoys. Serat leaned forward again. That contradicts survivability doctrine. Yes. It increases strike exposure. Yes. Why accept that risk? Hale answered. Because attackers choose confidence over accuracy. That sentence remained suspended in the chamber longer than any previous answer. Confidence over accuracy. Coalition doctrine assumed attackers optimized for certainty. Human doctrine assumed attackers optimized for speed of decision. Those assumptions were not compatible. But they were not mutually exclusive either. Which meant something important. Coalition doctrine might be incomplete. Thalek deactivated the simulation overlay entirely. Then opened a different dataset. Archived engagement recordings from the Outer Corridor Defense Campaign. Real convoy strikes. Real interceptors. Real escort failures. He overlaid Hale's formation geometry onto one of them. The result was immediate. Not dramatic. Not perfect. But measurable. Convoy survival probability increased by 11%. Without additional escorts. Without reinforcement timing changes. Without sensor upgrades. Serat saw it at the same moment Veltrin did. This formation would have worked there. Yes, Veltrin replied quietly. Thalek ran a second overlay. Then a third. Then a fourth. Each time, convoy survivability margins increased slightly. Not dramatically. But consistently. Serat finally asked the question that had been forming since the review began. Cadet Hale, how many convoy protection conflicts has humanity studied before joining the coalition? Hale answered. Most of them. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Recognition. Because humanity had entered coalition space later than most member species. Later meant something important. It meant humanity arrived after many convoy wars had already happened. Which meant humanity had something the coalition did not. Perspective. Veltrin closed the archive display slowly. Then he spoke in a tone Hale had not heard before. Cadet Hale, he said. Your simulation solution is no longer classified as a performance anomaly. Hale remained still. What is it classified as, instructor? Veltrin answered carefully. A doctrinal variance requiring integration review. Serat completed the statement. And that review does not occur at the cadet level. For the first time since the simulation began, Hale understood the situation had moved beyond the classroom. Because when coalition doctrine changed, cadets did not stay observers. They became sources. The Interstellar Tactical Academy did not escalate doctrine questions quickly. It escalated them carefully. Which meant when Cadet Armin Hale received a sealed consultation notice less than 3 hours after the simulation review ended, something unusual had already happened behind the scenes. The notice did not request clarification. It requested documentation. Specifically, human convoy protection doctrine, historical variants, transitional frameworks, and operational assumptions. Cadets were not normally asked to provide doctrine. Cadets studied it. But Hale understood what the request meant. The Academy had not found what it expected inside coalition integration archives. So now it was looking somewhere else. The consultation chamber assigned for the session was not part of the standard instructional wing. It belonged to the Strategic Compatibility Division. Most cadets never entered that section of the Academy complex. Because its purpose was not education. Its purpose was alignment. Coalition fleets depended on alignment. Alignment of sensors. Alignment of communications. Alignment of engagement thresholds. And most importantly, Alignment of expectations. Instructor Veltrin was already present when Hale arrived. So was Serat. And so was someone Hale had never seen before. Commander Irish. Coalition Doctrine Integration Authority. Not an instructor. Not a simulation analyst. A fleet officer. Which meant this conversation had moved beyond training evaluation. Commander Irish did not begin immediately. Instead, he reviewed Hale's simulation record in silence. Then he spoke. Cadet Hale, your Scenario 7C solution has been compared against 12 archived convoy strike engagements. Hale remained still. 8 of those engagements show improved survival probability under your formation geometry. Hale did not respond. Not because he was surprised. Because cadets did not evaluate doctrine statistics during consultations. Irish continued. The remaining 4 show no measurable improvement. That is expected, Hale replied. Serat looked up. Explain. Hale adjusted the projection interface. Convoy protection doctrine assumes attackers commit early, he said. If attackers delay commitment, the geometry becomes less effective. Commander Irish nodded once. So your doctrine predicts attacker hesitation thresholds? Yes. And adjusts escort behavior accordingly? Yes. Veltrin watched the exchange carefully. Because something subtle had already become clear. Human convoy protection doctrine did not rely on formation strength alone. It relied on timing psychology. Coalition doctrine relied on geometry. Human doctrine relied on decisions. Commander Irish activated a different projection. Coalition First Contact Integration Archives. Humanity's Original Submission Package. Fleet Propulsion Compatibility. Sensor Translation Matrices. Command Hierarchy Structures. Engagement Authorization Protocols. Everything expected. Everything standard. Everything complete. Except one category. Convoy Protection Doctrine. Irish turned toward Hale. This section is empty. Yes, Hale replied. Why? The question was not accusatory. It was procedural. Coalition integration required doctrinal transparency to ensure multi-species fleet coordination remained stable during crisis operations. If something was missing, it mattered. Hale answered carefully. Because it wasn't requested. Commander Irish considered that response. Coalition integration requests all fleet doctrine categories. Yes. Convoy protection qualifies. Yes. Then why was it not submitted? Hale paused briefly. Then answered honestly. Because it wasn't classified as fleet doctrine. Veltrin watched Irish closely. The commander did not react immediately. Instead, he opened another archive window. Humanity's Transitional Orbital Defense Studies. Merchant Protection Frameworks. Civilian Traffic Escort Strategies. Commercial Convoy Survivability Modeling. Thousands of entries. None of them labeled fleet doctrine. All of them labeled infrastructure security. Serat spoke quietly. You separated civilian protection doctrine from fleet doctrine. Yes, Hale replied. Why? Because they are different missions. Commander Irish folded his upper arms behind his back. Coalition fleets perform both functions simultaneously. Yes. That requires unified doctrine. Yes. Humanity did not unify them. No. That answer stayed in the chamber longer than expected. Because unified doctrine was a core assumption of coalition fleet coordination. One command structure. One engagement logic. One response framework. Humanity had apparently maintained two. Veltrin spoke carefully. Cadet Hale, are these civilian protection doctrines still active within human fleet operations? Yes. Separate from coalition doctrine? Yes. Serat's ocular ridge shifted slightly. Why maintain parallel doctrine? Hale answered. Because civilian movement defines strategic stability. Commander Irish did not respond immediately. Instead, he expanded the projection grid again. This time, the display showed coalition logistics corridor loss statistics from the last 2 centuries. Convoy attrition rates. Escort survivability ratios. Command preservation metrics. All within acceptable operational thresholds. All consistent with doctrine expectations. But something else appeared as well. Civilian infrastructure recovery time. And that number was much larger. Irish spoke quietly. Coalition doctrine assumes convoy loss is recoverable. Yes, Hale said. It usually is. Yes. But infrastructure loss is not. Serat looked up from her display. Your doctrine protects infrastructure first. Yes. Even when escorts are endangered. Yes. Veltrin understood the implication immediately. Coalition doctrine preserved fleets to preserve stability. Human doctrine preserved movement to preserve stability. Both approaches protected the same outcome. But they protected it differently. Commander Irish changed the projection again. This time, the scenario was not a simulation. It was real. Outer Corridor Defense Campaign. Convoy Strike Archive Segment 4. A civilian logistics group destroyed during interceptor harassment operations 92 cycles earlier. Coalition escorts had withdrawn according to doctrine. Command continuity preserved. Fleet intact. Convoy lost. Hale studied the projection. Then he spoke quietly. A forward emission shift would have delayed the strike window. Serat looked at him. How much? 6 to 9 seconds. That is not significant. It is, Hale replied. Why? Because reinforcement arrival window begins at 8 seconds. Commander Irish replayed the engagement with Hale's geometry overlay applied. Convoy survivability probability increased. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to change classification outcome from loss to recovery. Veltrin exhaled slowly. This doctrine would have altered the campaign record. Yes, Hale said. It would have. Commander Irish finally closed the projection. Then he asked the question the Academy had never asked before. Cadet Hale, why did humanity never present this doctrine during coalition integration? Hale hesitated. Not because he lacked an answer. Because he understood the weight of the question. Then he answered. Because humanity assumed the coalition already had it. No one spoke. Because that answer made sense. Human convoy protection doctrine had existed for centuries before first contact. Coalition convoy protection doctrine had existed for centuries before humanity arrived. Each side assumed the other solutions overlapped. Neither side checked. Serat finally broke the silence. Cadet Hale, how many additional escort protection variations exist within human infrastructure doctrine? Hale answered carefully. More than 12. Commander Irish did not react outwardly. But Veltrin recognized the significance immediately. Coalition escort doctrine contained 3. Human infrastructure doctrine contained 12. That difference was not small. It was structural. Irish turned toward Veltrin. Then toward Serat. Then back toward Hale. This review will be transferred to Fleet Doctrine Integration Command. Hale nodded once. That is expected. Veltrin added quietly. Cadet Hale, integration reviews do not normally begin at the Academy level. I understand. Serat completed the thought. They begin after fleet contact. For the second time since the simulation began. Humanity's presence inside coalition doctrine had changed direction. Because until now, the Academy believed it was teaching humanity how coalition fleets protected convoys. Now it was beginning to realize something else entirely. Humanity had been protecting convoys long before joining the coalition. And it had been doing it differently the entire time. The request did not come from the Academy. It came from the Fleet Doctrine Integration Command. That distinction mattered immediately. Instructor consultations were routine. Integration reviews were procedural. Fleet-requested simulations were neither. They only happened when something observed at the Academy suggested a change large enough to affect operational assumptions across coalition patrol sectors. Cadet Armin Hale received the notice at the beginning of the next training cycle. Simulation Theater 7. Restricted observation session. Instructor attendance required. Fleet liaison presence authorized. Cadets were not normally invited to sessions like that. But this time, Hale's presence was not optional. He was not attending as a student. He was attending as the origin point of the anomaly. Simulation Theater 7 was larger than the standard instructional chambers. It existed for multi-fleet coordination rehearsals. Real campaigns had been modeled there. Real corridor defense failures had been reviewed there. And sometimes, new doctrine had been tested there. When Hale entered, the observation tier was already occupied. Not by instructors alone. By officers. Coalition officers. Instructor Veltrin acknowledged Hale's arrival without ceremony. Cadet Hale, he said calmly, today's exercise is based on an archived convoy strike engagement from the Outer Corridor Defense Campaign. Hale recognized the name immediately. Segment 4. The destroyed logistics convoy from the previous session's review projection. Yes, instructor. Veltrin nodded once. You will repeat the engagement using your formation geometry. That instruction was unusual for a simple reason. Academy simulations normally evaluated cadets. They did not evaluate doctrine. But this session was not evaluating Hale. It was evaluating whether his maneuver could be reproduced outside Scenario 7C. Commander Irish stood beside the central projection interface. This simulation will run 3 variations, he said. Coalition Standard Escort Geometry, Human Convoy Protection Geometry, and Combined Formation Adaptation. Hale remained still. Combined adaptation meant something important. It meant the fleet was not testing whether human doctrine worked. It was testing whether coalition doctrine could change. The scenario initialized. Convoy Group, 8 logistics carriers. Escort Screen, 2 patrol frigates. Interceptor Threat, 4 fast attack signatures. Reinforcement arrival window, delayed. Not ideal. Not recoverable under normal doctrine assumptions. That was why the engagement had entered the archive. It had already been lost once. Simulation control activated the first run. Coalition Standard Escort Geometry. The escorts formed a defensive perimeter. Maintained visibility priority. Preserved command continuity. Intercept vectors stabilized quickly. Strike window opened. Convoy losses began within 90 seconds. Reinforcement arrival occurred too late. Outcome classification. Convoy destroyed. Escorts preserved. Command continuity maintained. Expected. Documented. Final. Commander Irish did not comment. Instead, he initiated the second run. Cadet Hale, he said quietly. Your formation. Hale adjusted the escort positions. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Carefully. He shifted emission timing first. Then escort spacing. Then convoy acceleration coordination. The geometry changed slowly. But its intention changed immediately. The escorts were no longer forming a wall. They were forming a conversation. Instructor Serat noticed first. He is shaping approach confidence again. Veltrin nodded. Yes. The interceptors entered sensor range. They behaved exactly as expected. Split vector entry. Convoy prioritization. Escort avoidance behavior. Standard strike profile. Standard engagement assumptions. Standard failure pattern. Until Hale delayed convoy engine synchronization by 4 seconds. Commander Irish watched the telemetry carefully. Convoy timing shift detected. Veltrin replied. Yes. Same maneuver as Scenario 7C. Yes. The forward escort accelerated. Not toward the interceptors. Toward the space they expected to occupy. Targeting solutions changed. Not completely. Just enough. Interceptor confidence dropped. Serat opened probability modeling overlays. Convoy survival probability increased. Not dramatically. But measurably. The second escort reduced emission strength temporarily. Sensor uncertainty increased. Interceptor targeting logic recalculated again. Strike priority shifted. Commander Irish spoke quietly. He is redistributing strike certainty. Veltrin replied. Yes. He is. The interceptors committed early. Earlier than they had in the archived engagement. Earlier than coalition doctrine predicted. Earlier than they should have. Because Hale had made hesitation expensive. Strike window opened. But not completely. Not enough. Convoy losses began. Then stopped. Because reinforcement arrival occurred inside the adjusted timing window. Outcome classification changed. Convoy partially preserved. Escort integrity reduced but operational. Command continuity maintained. No one spoke immediately. Because the engagement had changed classification status. From total loss. To contested survival. Without additional escorts. Without sensor upgrades. Without reinforcement acceleration. Only formation geometry had changed. Commander Irish initiated the third run. Combined adaptation. Coalition perimeter visibility retained. Human emission timing adjustments integrated. Escort cohesion maintained. Convoy acceleration staggered deliberately. The interceptors entered again. Their approach pattern changed slightly. Not because their programming changed. Because their expectations did. Serat noticed it immediately. They delayed commitment. Veltrin replied. Yes. Why? Because the formation suggested uncertainty. Commander Irish watched the probability grid update. Convoy survival probability rose faster than before. Not dramatically. Consistently. Strike window opened later this time. Much later. Later than reinforcement arrival. Later than expected engagement termination threshold. Later than the original engagement timeline entirely. Outcome classification updated automatically. Convoy preserved. Escorts operational. Command continuity maintained. The chamber remained silent. Because the archive engagement had just changed history. Not literally, but doctrinally. Coalition escort geometry had never preserved that convoy before. Now it could. Instructor Veltrin finally spoke. This formation is stable. Serat answered. Yes. It is. Commander Irish closed the projection slowly. Then turned toward Hale. Cadet Hale, he said. This is no longer a simulation anomaly. Hale remained still. Yes, Commander. Irish continued. This is a reproducible doctrine variance. Veltrin added quietly. And reproducible doctrine variances are not evaluated at the Academy. Serat completed the thought. They are evaluated by Fleet Command. Hale understood immediately what that meant. Simulation Theater 7 had not tested his maneuver. It had confirmed something else entirely. Human convoy protection doctrine did not simply work in controlled classroom scenarios. It worked in real engagements. Engagements the Coalition had already lost once before. Commander Irish issued the final instruction of the session. Cadet Hale, he said. Fleet Doctrine Integration Command requests full access to humanity's infrastructure protection archives. Hale nodded once. That request will be forwarded through the appropriate channels. Veltrin watched him carefully. Cadet, how long will that process take? Hale considered the answer honestly. Not long. Serat asked the next question quietly. Why not? Hale replied. Because most of it isn't classified. No one spoke for several seconds. Because that answer carried consequences larger than the simulation itself. Coalition doctrine had assumed humanity entered interstellar operations as a junior participant in convoy protection strategy. But humanity had not entered unprepared. It had entered with centuries of infrastructure defense experience. Experience the Coalition had never asked to see. Commander Irish closed the session formally. Integration review transferred to Fleet Command. For the first time since the exercise began, the Academy was no longer studying a cadet. It was studying humanity. Fleet Doctrine Integration Command did not move quickly. It moved carefully. Because doctrine changes affected more than tactics. They affected expectations. And expectations shaped how fleets survived their first minutes of contact with the unknown. Which was why the request sent through Coalition channels after Simulation Theater 7 did not ask for a demonstration. It asked for access. Full access to human infrastructure protection doctrine archives. Not summaries. Not integration briefings. Archives. The response from humanity arrived faster than anyone expected. Not instantly. But faster than Coalition integration timelines normally allowed. That speed alone told Commander Irish something important. Humanity had anticipated the request. Not the timing. But the question itself. The archive transfer began 72 hours after authorization. It did not arrive as a single doctrine packet. It arrived as layers. Maritime escort transition studies. Orbital convoy protection frameworks. Commercial traffic survivability modeling. Early expansion corridor defense strategies. Civilian evacuation escort geometries. Each layer carried the same classification marker. Infrastructure protection doctrine. Not fleet doctrine. Not combat doctrine. Infrastructure protection. Instructor Veltrin reviewed the first layer personally. Because he expected to confirm what the Academy already suspected. A handful of additional escort formations. Perhaps several emission timing variants. Possibly a different convoy acceleration framework. Instead, he found something else. Human convoy protection doctrine did not begin in orbit. It began at sea. The earliest documents described escort vessels protecting cargo convoys across open planetary oceans centuries before humanity achieved spaceflight capability. The language was unfamiliar. The sensor assumptions were primitive. But the logic was not. Convoys moved in predictable patterns. Attackers exploited predictability. Escorts shaped attacker expectations. Not through strength. Through behavior. Veltrin paused the archive playback. Because something inside the modeling tables looked familiar. He opened a comparison overlay with Scenario 7C telemetry. The geometry matched. Not exactly, but structurally. The same logic. The same timing adjustments. The same emission masking assumptions. Adapted across centuries of technological change. Serrat entered the review chamber while he was still studying the projection. You found something? Yes. What? Veltrin answered carefully. It isn't new doctrine. Serrat tilted her head slightly. Then what is it? Veltrin replied. It's continuous doctrine. That distinction mattered. Coalition escort geometries evolved in stages. Each species contributed something. Sensor logic improved. Propulsion changed. Command hierarchy stabilized. Doctrine updated accordingly. Human doctrine had not updated that way. It had adapted instead. Continuously. Across environments. Across centuries. Across technologies. Commander Irish joined the archive review shortly afterward. He did not begin with the earliest documents. He began with the most recent. Orbital expansion corridor escort frameworks from humanity's late pre-coalition period. Convoy survivability modeling during early extrasolar colonization. Commercial traffic protection strategies during unstable transit route establishment. These were not historical curiosities. They were operational frameworks. Recent ones. Irish open probability comparison overlays. Coalition convoy attrition models from the same period. Human convoy attrition models. The difference was not dramatic. But it was consistent. Human logistics convoys experienced fewer complete loss events. Not fewer attacks. Fewer losses. Serrat noticed it at the same time. They accepted higher escort exposure margins. Yes, Irish replied. But preserved movement continuity. Movement continuity. That phrase appeared repeatedly inside human infrastructure protection doctrine. Convoys were not isolated assets. They were arteries. If movement stopped, stability stopped. Coalition doctrine preserved fleets. Human doctrine preserved flow. Veltrin opened another archive segment. Early extrasolar evacuation escort strategies. Emergency relocation convoy formations. Civilian transit under incomplete sensor coverage. These scenarios were not standard military operations. They were survival logistics operations. And yet, the escort geometry looked familiar again. Serrat studied the overlay quietly. They expected sensor uncertainty. Yes, Veltrin replied. They planned for it. Coalition doctrine minimized uncertainty before committing escorts. Human doctrine assumed uncertainty would exist and shape behavior around it. That difference explained something the Academy had not understood before. Scenario 7C had never been designed as a recoverable exercise. It had been designed as a judgment test. Human doctrine treated it as a solvable problem. Commander Irish activated a different dataset. Coalition First Contact Integration Reports. Initial Human Fleet Compatibility Assessments. Sensor Translation Success, acceptable. Command Hierarchy Alignment, acceptable. Escort Geometry Compatibility, acceptable. Convoy Protection Doctrine, not evaluated. Serrat spoke quietly. We never asked. No, Irish replied. We did not. Veltrin closed the dataset slowly. Because the implication was now unavoidable. Human convoy protection doctrine had not been missing. It had been ignored. Filtered out automatically as legacy material. Material considered irrelevant after the transition to interstellar operations. Material that turned out not to be irrelevant at all. The second archive layer arrived later that same cycle. This one carried a different classification marker. Behavioral Threat Modeling Support Frameworks. Serrat opened it first. Then paused. Then reopened it again. These are attacker expectation maps, she said. Veltrin moved closer to the projection. Yes. They are. Coalition doctrine modeled attacker capability. Human doctrine modeled attacker decisions. Those were not the same datasets. Capability described what attackers could do. Expectation described what attackers were likely to choose. Commander Irish reviewed the probability grids carefully. These models predict early commitment windows. Yes, Serrat replied. They do. Veltrin understood immediately what that meant. Scenario 7C interceptors had committed early. Not randomly. Predictably. Because they behaved exactly the way human expectation modeling predicted they would. Serrat opened another engagement overlay. Outer Corridor Defense Campaign. Segment 4. The Destroyed Convoy. Human expectation modeling predicted early interceptor commitment again. Exactly where Hale had shifted emission timing. Exactly where convoy survival probability changed. Commander Irish spoke quietly. This was preventable. No one disagreed. Because the archive proved something uncomfortable. Coalition fleets had not failed due to lack of strength. They had failed due to incomplete assumptions. The third archive layer arrived several hours later. This one carried a designation none of them expected. Transit Corridor Resilience Doctrine. Veltrin opened it slowly. Because convoy escort geometry normally belonged to fleet operations. Transit Corridor Resilience belonged to infrastructure planning. Not combat doctrine. The projection expanded across the entire chamber wall. Trade route mapping. Civilian movement density modeling. Reinforcement timing corridors. Emergency reroute fallback networks. Escort positioning relative to economic flow stability. Serat spoke first. This is not escort doctrine. No, Veltrin replied. It isn't. Commander Irish finished the thought. It's strategic stability doctrine. Human convoy protection geometry did not exist independently. It existed as part of a larger system. Movement preservation. Corridor continuity. Infrastructure survival. Fleet behavior adapted around those priorities. Not the other way around. Veltrin finally understood why Scenario 7C had looked different under Hale's command. He had not changed escort geometry. He had applied infrastructure protection logic to a fleet problem. Commander Irish closed the archive display. Then issued a quiet instruction. Prepare a compatibility projection. Serat nodded once. Academy level. No, Irish replied. Fleet level. Veltrin looked toward the commander. Which sectors? Irish answered. All corridor defense sectors. Because the conclusion was no longer uncertain. Human convoy protection doctrine was not a local variation. It was not a historical curiosity. It was not an isolated training anomaly. It was a system-level approach to stability preservation. One the coalition had never evaluated before. One the academy had never been asked to teach. One the fleet was now preparing to integrate. And somewhere inside the tactical academy, Cadet Armin Hale was still attending classes as scheduled. Because he did not yet know something important. The simulation he had corrected in Theater 3 had not only changed how escorts protected convoys. It had changed how the coalition understood movement itself. The day the academy changed its question. Doctrine did not change quickly inside the coalition. It could not. Too many fleets depended on it. Too many species trusted it. Too many patrol sectors operated under assumptions built across centuries of shared experience. When doctrine changed, it changed carefully. And when it changed at the academy level, it meant the fleet had already decided something important. Cadet Armin Hale noticed the change before anyone explained it. Because Scenario Block 7C disappeared from the standard simulation rotation. Not permanently, but temporarily. It returned 2 training cycles later under a different classification label. Scenario 7C, Corridor Continuity Variant. That label had never existed before. The classroom noticed immediately. Coalition cadets recognized simulation naming structures the same way fleet officers recognized engagement priority signals. When a scenario name changed, its purpose changed. Instructor Serat began the session without commentary. The projection activated. Convoy group, 12 logistics carriers. Escort screen, 3 frigates. Interceptor threat, dual vector strike entry. Reinforcement arrival, delayed. Exactly the same parameters as before. But one line had changed. Primary objective, preserve movement continuity. Not command continuity. Movement continuity. Several cadets adjusted posture. Because objective hierarchy determined everything about escort behavior. Movement continuity meant convoy survival mattered more than escort preservation. It meant escorts were expected to shape attack behavior. Not withdraw from it. It meant doctrine had changed. Serat spoke calmly. This scenario now evaluates corridor stability preservation under incomplete certainty conditions. No one asked what that meant. Because everyone in the room understood. It meant they were being taught something new. Cadet Hale remained silent. Not because he did not recognize the change. Because he recognized exactly what it represented. The Academy had not added human doctrine to its archive. It had rewritten the question the scenario asked. Instructor Veltrin observed from the upper chamber. He did not speak during the session. He rarely did during transition phase instruction cycles. Because this session was not about performance evaluation anymore. It was about compatibility adaptation. The first cadet attempted the scenario using standard coalition perimeter geometry. Convoy losses began immediately. Escort survival remained stable. Command continuity preserved. Outcome classification. Movement continuity failure. Not convoy loss. Movement continuity failure. The second cadet attempted emission masking variation. Convoy survivability increased slightly. Escort exposure increased slightly. Outcome classification remained unchanged. Movement continuity failure. The third cadet adjusted formation asymmetry. Convoy survival probability improved further. Escort integrity margins narrowed. Outcome classification remained unchanged. Movement continuity failure. Serat allowed 3 more attempts before she paused the session. Then she said something unusual. Cadet Hale. Yes, instructor. Demonstrate the adjustment. Hale moved to the projection interface. He did not change the escort spacing immediately. Instead, he altered convoy acceleration timing first. Then emission synchronization. Then formation density. The same sequence he had used before. But not exactly the same geometry. Because the scenario objective had changed. Veltrin noticed immediately. He is adjusting for corridor stability thresholds. Commander Irish, observing from the integration tier behind him, nodded once. Yes. He is. The interceptors entered the projection space. Their approach vectors matched previous scenario 7C parameters. Their commitment timing did not. They hesitated earlier this time. Because the formation signaled uncertainty sooner. Serat watched the probability grid update. Convoy survivability increased steadily. Escort exposure remained within acceptable limits. Command continuity remained stable. Reinforcement arrival window approached. Outcome classification updated automatically. Movement continuity preserved. The classroom remained silent. Because they understood what had just happened. The scenario had not become easier. The objective had become different. And Hale had solved it again. Serat turned toward the class. Corridor stability preservation requires escort behavior that influences attacker decision timing, she said. Coalition doctrine previously emphasized deterrence visibility. She paused briefly. This scenario now evaluates expectation shaping. Veltrin watched the cadets carefully. Not one of them appeared confused. They appeared focused. Because what they had just seen made sense. Not as an exception. As a method. After the session ended, Hale expected another consultation notice. Instead, he received something else. A fleet doctrine integration acknowledgement request. Cadets did not normally receive those. They were sent to officers, researchers, command analysts, not students. The message contained only one sentence. Coalition Corridor Defense Modeling has incorporated human infrastructure protection frameworks into baseline escort doctrine compatibility simulations. Hale read it twice. Not because it was unclear. Because it was precise. Baseline compatibility simulations meant something specific. Human doctrine was no longer experimental. It was assumed. Later that cycle, Commander Irish visited the Academy classroom wing for the first time since the archive transfer began. He did not enter Simulation Theater 3 immediately. Instead, he stopped outside it. Because the chamber represented the beginning of the change. Veltrin joined him there. You have integration results, Veltrin said. Yes, Irish replied. Fleet level? Yes. Veltrin waited. Then asked the only question that mattered. How significant? Commander Irish answered carefully. Corridor survivability margins increased across 9 sectors. Veltrin remained still. And escort integrity? Within acceptable thresholds. Command continuity? Unchanged. Veltrin understood immediately what that meant. Human convoy protection doctrine had improved infrastructure survivability without weakening fleet stability. That combination was rare. Extremely rare. Serat joined them shortly afterward. Sector 12 adopted expectation-shaping escort geometry yesterday, she said. Veltrin looked toward her. Already? Yes.